Hi everybody, this is Kate Haley with Glazer's Camera in Seattle, Washington, and we want to welcome you to Cinema Week here during our 85th anniversary event. That's right, 85 years. Woo! Third generation family-owned camera store here in Seattle, Washington. If you're in the Seattle area, or even if you're not, when you come and visit Seattle, come in and check out the store. You can also make those purchases online if you like to buy things online, which most of us are doing right now. As I said, we're doing Cinema Week this week, which means we are bringing you a variety of conversations and presentations on elements of cinema, from talking about cameras to audio and much, much more. Along with that, there will be some promotions along the way. So in order to get some of those promotions, though, you do need to register. So if you haven't registered for this session, do me a favor and quickly go register for that session, because there is a little promo happening that is in conjunction with this particular presentation we're doing right now. And in order to get that promo, we'll send you an email, but you've got to be registered for it. With that said, today we have Peter Marr, who is a Canon Cinema EOS Pro Market Rep, based down in LA, I believe. He's in Cali. And he's going to talk to you about some of the newest Canon Cinema EOS cameras and lenses. He's going to talk about some of the differences. The best of both worlds is how we phrased it. So with that in mind, what I'd love to do first is, Peter, could you tell us just a little bit about you, what you do with Canon, and maybe a little bit of your background in film and video, just so we get to know you a little bit.
Of course. Again, thank you for having me. I know I said this off camera, but thank you again. Big fan of your store. It's so good to see that you all are actually still putting content out there and getting the community together. It's a really big issue, especially now. My name is Peter Marr. I'm actually an independent producer and camera operator in Southern California. And I'm also a pro market specialist with Canon USA. So I've technically been teaching on Canon product, whether it's cinema, still, or even smaller video cameras, all the way back to the XL1 and the GL2 since right around 2000, 2001. So I've seen the evolution of the gear. I've seen the gear grow up, so to speak. I've seen formats come and go. And this is one of the most exciting times, because now we're in a world where all of our cameras are starting to intermingle into other sections. So this is a place where our still technology with the autofocus and the intelligent tracking is starting to filter into some of our cinema cameras, and our cinema cameras can utilize all those lenses now. And now our broadcast lens technology is starting to move into some of our cinema lens technology. So this is a nice time to be at Canon and to use Canon gear, because you're taking advantage of all of that technology, no matter what your output, no matter what your delivery. And what I want to cover today, I'm going to cover a few of the Cine Servo lenses. I'm also going to cover the C300 Mark III and the C500 Mark II. I'm going to cover the Sumaray Primes, and I'm also going to be able to field any questions if you all throw it out there. So I've got some samples with me. I'm going to be able to show you how some of this gear is expandable. You can make it as big as you need it to be, or as small as you need it to be. And just however your delivery, what your workflow is, whatever you choose, whatever you need to do, our gear can work for you.
That is fantastic. Before we get started, just that quick reminder that for those of you tuning in, if you do have questions during the session, don't be shy. Post those questions in the comments on Facebook or in the YouTube chat. And as Peter mentioned, we'll do some Q&A throughout. So this is a great opportunity to get information from someone who knows this stuff in and out. So don't be shy. Get those questions posted, and we'll do a little Q&A throughout the session. All right, Peter, I'll send it back over to you, and let's get started.
All right. Thanks for letting me do that long-winded intro. Again, don't be shy. Throw some questions out there. It'll break up what I have to say. We'll put some chapters in there. We'll move along to a few different pieces here and there. So first of all, I really wanted to cover the Cine Servo lenses. So I'm going to throw in this. This was originally our 17 to 120. And this is basically one of the most popular lenses that we've made up to this date. It is a 17 millimeter wide up to 120 millimeters. It's got a servo zoom on it, and it's one of those lenses that covers a lot of bases. It's lightweight. It works on our cinema lenses. It also has a PL or an EF adapter. And then Canon also decided to make a 50 to 1000. So this is a lens that was designed specifically almost as a challenge to Canon to create a lens with 1,000 millimeters that covers a Super 35 sensor. And there's actually a 1.5 extender built into it. So you can drop in that extender and you get up to 1,500 times zoom on this lens. And then off of that, we came out with a series, the compact Cine Servo series. So this was a series, we have an 18 to 80 and a 70 to 200. And these lenses are literally just over 2.5 pounds. They're an F or a T 4.4, so they're very small, and it fit that little niche between, say, if you're going to get an EF lens without a servo drive on it, you want that cinema coated glass, you want it to look and feel and work like a cinema camera with the focus and zoom controls or the zoom commands on it. That's the lens for you. Super lightweight, fairly inexpensive, inexpensive exactly for what it is, and it works on our cinema lenses, works on our cinema cameras, and if you really get that hankering, you can still use some of the features on an EOS DSLR camera. The newest one we have in the group is the 25 to 250. Now, this is a lens that's fairly similar in shape and size to the 17 to 120, and like I said before, the 17 to 120 was our most popular lens that we've made for this category. So the 25 to 250 comes in, and it's basically a 295 to a 395, and around 187 millimeters is when that zoom starts to ramp down. And the way these lenses are designed is you get a nice wide aperture up to a certain point because the size and the weight, if we kept it at 295 all the way through to 250 millimeters, that lens element would be much bigger, much heavier, much more expensive. So this lens is the perfect storm, if you will, of size, weight, cost, and performance. When you compare this lens, you also get that 11 blade iris, so you get that nice rounded bokeh. You also have the focus guides, the dual pixel autofocus. So this lens was made to work in conjunction with our cinema cameras as well. So it covers a Super 35 sensor. However, there is a drop-in that will cover a full frame sensor. So not only does this camera work on the C300 series, this lens will work on the C500, the C700 full frame. So now it's even more versatile with more reach up to 250 millimeters, even more with that extender. And when you compare the two, they're very similar. They're very similar in size, they're very similar in weight. They're almost complementary to each other. So these two lenses work very well in tandem, hand to hand. And the next sort of world I wanted to talk about is we're getting into these cinema servo lenses. So you can put this on a camera, and this is basically going to go on to, right now I have in my hand a C300 Mark III. This fits onto the front of this camera, and this camera actually stops, the body stops right about here. There's an extension pack with a V-lock mount battery adapter on the back of it. So now we go into these cameras that can be as big or as small as you want them to be. So when we talk about these cameras, this camera right here is a C500. This is the same exact shape and size as a C300 Mark III. So this is the C500 Mark II. And if you notice, I have an EF lens right on the front of it. So right out of the box, the camera delivers with the EF mount. It's our most universal mount. You can get any of the Cine servos in an EF mount. You can even get our Cine zooms in an EF mount. And again, you can choose, I think it's over 130 million lenses have been produced from Canon with that EF mount. All of the autofocus capability works through there. And now you're starting to get a little bit of a combination of image stabilization. So a lot of our EF lenses have image stabilizers built into them. And depending on whether it's a wide angle or a telephoto lens, those stabilizers are going to act a little bit differently. The C300 Mark III and the C500 Mark II actually have image stabilization, electronic stabilization built into them. So now you actually get a camera that can stabilize a lens or an image, whether the lens has a stabilizer built into it or not. Say if you have a prime lens that's an anamorphic, that's on, from a different manufacturer, we'll just say, you do have the option to have electronic stabilization for that lens in our cinema line with the C300 Mark III and the C500 Mark II. So we're starting to really advance this technology. Like I said before, you get about it's a 1.1 crop, so it crops in about 10%. But if you're out handheld shooting with a wide or even a tight 85, 100 millimeter lens, you still have that extra stabilization from the lens data coming in through the EF mount from a Canon EF lens, combining with the electronic stabilization technically in the body, even though it's not in-body stabilization. You do get that combination. So the lenses and the cameras start to talk to each other a little bit more. They communicate more. Even if you have a third-party lens on our C300 Mark III or C500 Mark II, you can essentially type in the focal length of that lens, and that camera body is going to know what lens is attached to that camera and stabilize that image accordingly. One thing I will say as a caveat, if you are capturing in XFAVC, you can turn on the stabilization. You can engage that electronic stabilization. If you're capturing in RAW, you don't get that option because there's a lot more processing, there's a lot more use of that sensor. But those are the only limitations. So now, I wanted to bring up the the C500 Mark II and the C300 Mark III. So you see a lot of points on this list. And what this list is basically telling you is you have two camera bodies that are exactly the same. And you essentially have one that's a full frame, and you also have one that's a Super 35. And when you start going down the differences between these two cameras, they're going to serve you a little bit different purpose depending on what your delivery is or what your shooting style is or what your workflow is. Both of these cameras are going to be able to give you a cinema raw light image, and they're also going to give you an XFAVC, and now you also get the proxy file for the raw light and the XFAVC. You also have in the C300 Mark III what we call a DGO sensor. So inside this sensor, you actually get more latitude coming off of that sensor. You also get a few more frame rates. You get 4K up to 120. You also have, off of that DGO sensor, you get a lot more detail, a lot cleaner image in the shadows, and you also get a little more in the highlight protection. But where you really see that difference is in the shadow detail. So now these cameras are starting to look the same, they're starting to act the same, and when it comes right down to it, these are really the biggest differences between these cameras. So when you start to look at these cameras, both of these are going to look exactly the same. You have the same body on the side, you have the same button structure layout on the side. You also have, on the opposite side of the camera, here it is, there it is. You also have the air intake and the exhaust on the non-operator side of the camera. So that was one of the things that I personally didn't love so much about the C300 Mark II, is that anytime I had that camera on a shoulder mount, that vent right in here would actually blow right into my face. Now it doesn't really do it. I mean, my cheeks get red enough as it is. I don't need that extra heat coming in to make it even hotter outside. So off of this, you get these, the air intake, the vent, and you also have your audio inputs built on the side, and you also have the XLR inputs built into the back of the camera. So again, this is an upgrade. This is something that when you start talking about these cameras and the way they're built, you actually get a lot of feedback from users. So when we talk to people and we say, hey, what would you like to see in the next generation of this camera? One of the biggest things from the C300 Mark II was XLR inputs on the body of the camera itself. And what do you know? Look at that, XLR inputs on the body of the camera itself. You also have the same battery pack. So now, anything from the C200, C300 Mark II, C300 Mark III, C500 Mark II, you have the same power supply on all of these cameras. So all of our batteries are going to be interchangeable. And now you're starting to see the menu structures become almost exactly the same, almost identical as well. So if you know one camera, you can walk all the way through any of the other cameras. You also have, off the back of here, you basically have your SDI outs, you have your 4-pin XLR, which is something fairly new for our cinema cameras. This is something we hadn't had up until the C500 Mark II. And then you also have this little blank on the back of it. So off of this little blank, this is the room for the expansion packs. And when we go into these expansion packs, this is what we have for the camera. So you can buy the camera just as the block of the camera. When you purchase the camera, it comes with a touchscreen LCD panel, but you also have the option to go ahead and take these different options for the back. So we have the EVF V50, the expansion unit version 1, and the expansion unit version 2. So when we go into this camera and we start talking about what can I put onto this camera, you have the option to take an electronic viewfinder, which is basically the same viewfinder we would have off of the C300 Mark II or the C200, and it's an expansion pack. So a lot of the people who buy these cameras or use these cameras, since they're so small, sometimes that EVF gets in the way, especially if you're going to be mounting this camera into a gimbal or onto a drone. That EVF is actually going to take a lot of that real estate in that space where that camera can flex and move. And now we have basically a pin rail on the back and almost a proprietary pin rail on here, and all you have to do is just plug it right in. You have 2 screws that go on the top, 2 screws that go in the back, and now you have an EVF, and now you have a camera that's extremely similar to what most people are used to when they're capturing with, say, the C300 Mark II or the C200. The other option you have is that expansion unit version 1, which is going to give you the gen lock, the remote, and you also have basically a Cat 5 port. So you can run this camera, say if you're going to gen lock between cameras. So if you do have a multi-camera shoot, you're running live, this is a nice expansion pack that if you're not doing that, you don't have to buy all of this technology when you buy the camera. You can just buy the expansion pack and put it right onto the side of the camera. The other one that we have is on the back of this, and this is the expansion pack version 2. And I'm going to pull this off in a second. We can talk about it a little bit more in a second, but this is basically the pack that gives you 2 more XLR inputs. There we go. 2 more XLR inputs. You also have a V-Lock battery pack accessory on the back of it. You have a D-tap, and you have a few more accessory inputs or outputs on there as well. So when we talk about the backs, like I said, I'll talk about the other one in a minute, but the one thing that really sells me on this camera is this mount exchange. So like I said before, you do get an EF mount on when you purchase this camera. It's built right on it. Comes with it. I can take this off. I have this EF mount right here, and I'm going to go ahead and just put a little cap on it. So boom, cap it up, and now I have the option if I want to take, say, a Suma Ray lens, and the Suma Rays are basically a PL, a little more of an enhanced version of our CNE lenses. So the same size, the same weight, the same shape. The biggest 2 differences are our Suma Ray lenses are going to have a PL mount. It's a very strong PL mount. As far as the focal lengths, anywhere from 14 to 135 millimeters, they're all primes. They all have the same size, the same shape, and they all have the same gear pattern. So if you take this lens off of a Fizz unit, you pull that lens out and you put another prime in there, everything is going to line up. Your Fizz unit's going to line right up with the same gear strokes that these have. It has the same rotation angle, but when you open the lens wide open, that's where the name Suma Ray comes into play. So Suma Ray is based off of floral gentleness and beauty, whereas standard cinema lens, a lot of times they're very strict as far as when they manufacture the lens. It has to be sharp from corner to corner. The lens manufacturing process is quite surgical when you talk about Canon lenses. They're very precise, they're very pristine. And when you get into the Suma Rays, one of the things that a lot of people kept coming back to us with is they wanted a lens with a little more character. They wanted a lens that, represented a look that we would have had years and years ago. So this is something that the lens designers and the engineers took in, and they created this line of lenses called the Suma Ray lenses. So when it's wide open, it gives a little bit different look. You start to see that cat's eye kind of go around the edges for the bokeh, the out of focus bokeh. There's a smoothness, but a gentle detail to skin tones, different coatings more or less. It's a different look when it's wide open, but when you close it down to about an f4 or a little bit past that, anywhere past that, it will look very, very similar to our CNE primes. Same aperture openings, the same focal lengths, again, the same weight, the same shape basically. A little bit heavier on the Sumo Rays because of the mount, but essentially they're the same thing. But when you open them wide open, and you get those singles, those one shots, those testimonial shots, that's where you really see the difference. And it's fairly subtle, and I think I've learned about 300 adjectives to describe that look, but it's also a look that when you see it, you'll know. It's a little bit different, it's beautiful, it's a little bit more buttery, so to speak, if you will, but it is a little bit different look. And now, if I want to take this Sumo Ray Prime, which is a PL mount, and I want to put it on my C300 Mark III or my C500 Mark II, all I have to do is exchange the mount. There's a PL mount, and there's also a locking EF mount for this camera. So to pull this mount off is literally 4 screws. There are 4 M3 screws that go right onto the front here, and I'm going to go ahead and do this live, so there's no pressure whatsoever for me to get this right. The one thing I really, really like about the way this is designed is it's 4 screws, and these screws will basically pull right off, and there's no ribbon, there's no, how can I say it, there's no electronic connection that's complicated. This is basically a little set of pins that line up to another set of pins. Once you pull it off, all of our mounts, whether it's a locking EF mount or whether it is a PL mount that's sold separately that you can purchase and carry alongside with this lens or with this camera, you can keep it, you can exchange it with a C300 Mark III, you can exchange it with a C500 Mark II, and to pull this mount off, all I have to do is just pull that off. And you saw that shim kind of pop off there, but we're going to put that right back on, and there's that mount section. And all I have to do is take this side, which has these pins locked right into it, and put it right back where that one goes in. Put my screws back in, set those back on, and now I'm ready to put a PL lens on there. So the one thing I'll say is you don't get the autofocus that you get with the CNEs. I'm sorry, you don't get the focus guide that you would get with the CNEs, but you do have that same lens exchange. You do have, you know, if you're careful, you can take about 2 minutes to change it out. If you're in a hurry, I've done it in about 1.5 minutes. And this is something you can do on set, on location. Before, with some of our older cinema cameras, you would have to take this camera into either Burbank, Costa Mesa, any of our repair facilities that would do this service, or our service centers to do this service. And you would have the option to mount or exchange that mount there. But here, you can do it right now. I just did it. It's ready to go, and I can just put that Sumo Ray Prime right on there. I guess now would be a good point to ask if there are any questions. Are there any questions?
Actually, there aren't. We're watching you do that, though, and thinking, please don't sneeze.
Please don't drop anything, Pedro.
Don't drop anything. Don't sneeze.
Yeah. So now, that's basically in there. Boom. And I'm good to go. So I do have a little setup for you. It's not going to be the best setup in the world, but I will show it to you. I don't know if this is going to be anything that would, show the bokeh off, but at least you'll get an image out of the camera, and then I'll be able to take the other camera body, move some pieces around so you can see how they interchange and how they act, and that way you can, basically see how easy it is to exchange. Once you have one camera body, you can basically take all of these accessories. You don't have to buy a separate accessory for each camera. You can just set it right in there, and these cameras play so nicely together. So nicely together. So I'm just going to go HDMI out. I've got another port that I'm going to activate on this switcher here. And now we are going to give you a look-see. And I'm going to give you a little background of what's going on here. This is basically how my setup is looking. And you can kind of see I've got a little bit of light going up off the ceiling. I've got this. And now I can stop down, I can stop wide open, I can throw it a little bit out of focus, and I can pull it back in. And you're going to see just the fall off is a little bit smoother, it's a little bit nicer. I'm sitting on a 50, so I can't really get in too tight or too far in, but at least you get a little bit of a feel of how that's working.
We need at least 3 more cameras.
And you don't have any questions, is what you're saying, right?
Yeah, we got you.
You're killing it.
Yep.
How many tripods and cameras do you have in that room right now?
I've got a whole lot.
All of them.
So right now, my A camera is a C100. I've got a 50 mil on it, 51.2. And I've also got the XF405, which is the B camera, which is this one right here. And just to give you a little heads up, when I need to zoom in on something, I get to zoom in, and then I get to zoom back out just from right back here. So sturdy. And then I also have, number 3 coming in. And then just to give you a little heads up, these are all of the accessories that you can get and change and move around with the C300 Mark III and the C500 Mark II. So I'm going to pull this off. I'm going to make a little bit of noise, hopefully not too much for you. And we're going to go right back into here. And you're going to see I basically have the 300 Mark III body sitting here. This is the same block, and this does have that back on there. So that same back is basically going to be the EU version 2 I said I was going to talk a little bit about later. And with this back, you actually get a whole smorgasbord of stuff that you can throw on there. So you actually have the camera body that basically stops right about here. You also have the Genlock, the RS422, you have the data port, you also have a lens port, you also have another power port, and you also have DTAP right off the side. And then on the other side, you actually have 2 more XLR inputs. So not only does this camera give you 4 channels of audio right in the camera body itself, whether it's the mini jack that's on the side if you want to do like a little shotgun microphone, or if you have your 2 XLRs to begin with, you also have the option, you also have the option to have those 2 extra XLRs on this expansion pack right here. The one thing I will say is a little bit of a caveat. This battery, any V-Lock battery has to be plugged in to get any of these extra ports to activate on the camera body itself. So you can run your 4-pin XLR power into the camera. The only thing is, in order to get this expansion pack to light up, if you will, you have to have that extra battery on the back of it. So I'm going to come back here. I'm going to take basically just a straight up exchange. I'm going to pull this off of one camera. I'm going to swing it over, and I'm going to pull it off and over to the side of the other camera. And this is just as simple and as easy as changing one little screw that actually has little wings on it, so there's no tools necessary, if you can see that right in there. And this is a proprietary port, but it's proprietary to all of our cinema lenses, or excuse me, all of our cinema camera bodies. So this LCD screen, this is a touch LCD screen. This is a little bit bigger than the C200's LCD screen, but it works. They interchange. They basically run on the same protocol. So you can take this and you can move it over to a different camera. You can move between the cameras, and I'm going to move the 500 out of the way here. And I'm going to give you this EF lens, and I want to show you a little autofocus, and I'm going to show you a little face detection in here too. So what's nice is even in manual focus, you have something called a focus guide. So our autofocus works whether it's an EF lens that has autofocus on it, which they all do, or if the CNE lens is mounted on there, or if that EF lens is in manual focus, you still get what's called a focus guide. So you'll see some faces here in a second. And let's see, it'll take me a few seconds to get this in here, so my apologies. I'm going to make sure we have the autofocus working here. There we go. And I'm going to go ahead and plug you in for a second. And I guess now would be a good time to ask if anybody has any questions.
No, sir, we're still good.
You're still killing it.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, you know what you're doing, and those tuning in are very quiet on the question front. So, But Devin's totally intrigued. He hasn't looked away.
Oh, good. Good. And you know what's funny is I have a tripod set up over here, but I'm quite reluctant in actually getting that tripod over because I just don't think we really need that tripod right now. And I'm going to give you know what? Might as well see what I'm doing. And what I can do is hit the function key. I can bump over. I can bring my ISO up quite a bit. And I'm going to hit my mirror so that way now I'm a little bit more in tune with what's going on. And if you can see that, a little bit, probably should turn that stabilizer on since I'm handheld. There we go. You can see that face detection working in there. You basically get all of the prominent faces that camera can pull out. So you see those arrows. I can take that, that little joystick and bump it over again, and you can pick and choose whatever faces you have in a crowd of people. So if you are doing an interview, if you have multiple people on the street, if you're doing anything that has faces, whether they're near or far, or whether or not they're moving in or moving out, that face detection works with all the EF lenses. It also works on our Cine servo lenses too. So if I had this on and I was able to power it up, there was one little cable missing, so I wasn't able to power up, but you still get that handheld motion. You still get that handheld motion, I guess. You still get, whether you want it to be a servo setup or not. And you also have all of the, sorry, I'm going to go over here. Here we go. Utilize everything I've got going on. And even on these servo lenses, you still have the focus and zoom demand, and you also have that graphics demand on there too. So if you ever see, like a football game and you're watching the first yard line or the first down yard line move down the field and move back, the CG graphics actually, you can go in and out, and all that information, whether it's the angle, the tilt, whatever, will actually be transferred through that as well. Let's see if there was anything else that I had brilliant to tell you. One thing I wanted to show you is basically when you look at these cameras, at least the 300 and the 500, 500 Mark II and the 300 Mark III, all of these are that camera. So you can make that as big or as small as you need to. You have the option for a very universal 4-pin XLR power supply to it. You also have the option to make it just a simple box that houses the sensor, more or less. And once you go into the menu, especially on, say, the C500, you get those options, whether you can go into full frame, you can crop it down to a Super 35, and you also have a lot of different recording options built in there, too. The other thing I will say with the 300 Mark III and 500 Mark II is you can build user LUTs. So if you go into, say, DaVinci Resolve and you create a cube LUT, you can actually upload that into the camera, and it's going to be a viewing LUT, so you can send it out to Video Village, you can put it out on a monitor, you can put it out to your LCD screen. You can see what that look that you built and that image coming into that camera is going to be, so that way you can adjust it accordingly. It's not going to bake it into the image, I will say, but you do have that option to upload 4 different cube LUTs into the camera body itself. The other thing is you do have that raw light. If you are in the C500 Mark II, you do have 5.9K. And if you're wondering why it's 5.9K, it's because the photosites are going to be the same size, the same pixel pitch as the C300 Mark II, the C300 Mark III, the C200. So you're going to keep that size of the pixel, which basically means you start to move around between these cameras and you know where your light levels are going to be. If you have T-stop lenses on there, you know what that light coming through that lens is going to be, the transmittance is. And also, when you start moving around, whether it's a C700 full frame, a C500 Mark II full frame, or Super 35 versions of each of those, or the 300s, you know where your light levels are. You know that if you switch from one to the other, or if you're using one as a B cam for the other, you know that your light levels are going to be the same. It makes production a lot faster, a lot easier. Once you bring in the autofocus, once you bring in a lot of the different tools, these cameras have waveform monitors built in, they have peaking levels, they have zebra, 300 Mark III, 500 Mark II, all have false color built into it. So you're dealing with a huge set of tools built into a little toolbox. And that box is interchangeable. That box has all the handles and all the pieces that you can mix and match. And now, same power supply, or same batteries, same handles, same LCD screens. And if you have one camera, you can start mixing and matching all these different pieces, whether it's the expansion unit version 2, whether it's just, if you're going handheld for a day, you can just throw the EVF on there. Or if you're on a shoot and you just need to gen lock the cameras without getting the entire giant expansion unit version 2, you can just get that little expansion unit version 1. Again, are there any questions out there?
No, sir. You're good to go.
Right.
We scheduled this till 1, but I didn't know do you have a full hour of the session that you planned, or?
Yeah, I just wanted to stop off every once in a while and make sure I wasn't going in a place where maybe somebody would be backed up a little bit. But since we're not, let's start breaking into this camera.
We just got a question in, so hang on 1 second.
Good.
Are there restrictions on which EF mount lenses support face autofocus on the C300 Mark III or the C500 Mark II, like on the C100 Mark II? And let me know if you want me to repeat that.
Yeah, to answer that question, it's the C100 Mark II is the dual pixel autofocus is not as advanced on the 100 Mark II as the 300 Mark II and up. So there was a world on this C100 Mark II that you're actually looking at right now where the area of coverage for the dual pixel autofocus was only about 20% vertical by about 25% horizontal. And to get face detection, you actually had to have one of, I think it was 5 STM lenses that would give you face detection all the way around the perimeter of that image.
I looked at them in after
And now when you're looking at the 300 Mark III, the 500 Mark II, that area covers about 80% of the footprint of that sensor. So like you saw earlier, I could look at a DVD cover since we're in COVID and that's basically the only cast I could afford for the day. I can move that around almost to the corners of the image and that face detection will work. And it works with any lens that has autofocus. Some lenses are much faster than other ones, I will say. For instance, if you have like an old 85-1.2, that's a little bit slower on the mechanism as far as how it autofocuses versus like a newer version of the 85.
Well, that makes sense.
When you start talking about newer lenses, they get a little bit faster, they communicate a little bit faster. And then, if you go into the world of the EOS R5 and the R6 and the EOS R with an RF lens, they get ridiculously fast.
Oh.
And the eye tracking autofocus is really fast. And one of the things I was going to show you in here, I'm going to break into the menu a little bit. That way I can show you some of the things that you can do with this as far as the autofocus goes. So right now, I'm going to go down to the focus control. And if you look down here, the focus isn't really going to be lit because I have the zoom array on here, but you can slow down the focus. You can make it a little bit faster. You can, the way that autofocus works on the newer cameras, whether it's the 300 or the 500, the latest versions, the autofocus will actually ramp up a little bit and then slow down when it lands into focus. So it's not just a linear blast of focus from point A to point B. It bumps up, it smooths out, and then it lands on its focus. So it looks a little more human. It's not as robotic as some of our past autofocus systems were, but you also get the option to speed it up, slow it down, If you're in a reality series, or if you're capturing a reality show or something like that, you're going to need that autofocus to bang in and bang out. So it's just boom, snap, snap. But if you're in a world where you want to set up a slow focus pull, you can go in and turn on what we call AF lock. So one of the easiest ways to set up a camera and set up any of the custom buttons on any of our cinema cameras, between you and I, all you have to do is hold the menu button down, and while you're holding it down, press any button with a number on it. So if we go into this right here, I'm going to hold the menu button down, and I'm just going to hit button number 9. And what happens is it brings up the custom function menu for button number 9. If I hit button 11, button 3, button 2, it would bring it up for button 2 or button 1 or whatever. But you have all of these options. So anywhere on that camera body, if you want to create a custom feature that is tied into a certain button, wherever it is on the camera, all you got to do is find that button, and you can change all of these options in that camera. So if I want to go up and I throw false color, I want to put the LUT on or off, if I want to pop in the ND filters, if I want it to be blank, I can basically make that button do whatever I want. So now, if I want to magnify the video terminal out, that's your LCD screen. If I want to magnify HDMI or monitor out, so if I cut this lens off, and I'm going to bust out of the menu button here. We're going to look at those guys again. I hit button number 9. It brings up my zoom. So I can take that joystick and I can move it down. I can move it around. I can find my tack sharp focus if I need to. Look at that smiley guy Vince right there. John in the background. And then if I hit button number 9 again, it goes right back out. So coming back off of this, go back into the menu. A lot of different things that you can do as far as, let me get down here, boom. We're going to come into this, and you have the sensor mode. So if you're in the C500 Mark II, you have 3 different options. You can go full frame. So if you have a lens that covers full frame, you're going to be able to get that image off of the corners of the image sensor. If you are using a lens that only covers a Super 35 sensor, you have the option to bump it into Super 35. You also have the option to bump it into Super 16. And when you get into Super 16, you have more frame rate options as well. So if I go into Super 35, you can see my frame of reference is actually going to be a little bit different. So that comes into there. If I go ahead and, I think you all know what's happening now. Boom, menu, look at that. The other thing about being in that full frame mode, when you capture in full frame and you're in raw light, that's where you get the 5.9K resolution out of. If you capture at full frame in XFAVC, so if we go in and say, if I want to go over and change XFAVC or RAW, in XFAVC, what happens is that camera will capture in full frame if you're in the full frame mode, but oversamples and gives you a 4K image. So through that oversampling process, you'll actually see a little bit of difference in between the noise levels, just because of the overprocessing process. You'll see your noise levels go down. It'll be a little bit crisper, a little bit cleaner. But if you're in the raw mode, you will be capturing that full 5.9K resolution. And you also have the sub-record format. And, we started calling it sub-record based off of the C200 because you had the option to go into MP4 or XFAVC, and for technical reasons, the MP4 files, the name structure just didn't line up the same as the XF files did, or the raw light files. And one thing I will say, I'm going to throw this out there, is if you do have that LCD screen attached to this camera, go down to that luminance tab and give it a +2, because that LCD screen out of the factory, out of the box, comes off very dim. And it's a little bit hard to see outside, so just keep this in your pocket. If you ever get that camera, you put that LCD screen on there, give it a bump 2 on this portion of the menu. As far as your audio goes, you do have the option to change your audio input selection, and you also have the option to change whether it's input 2 or input 1 for channel 2. So if you have a single XLR coming into that camera, You can change channel 2 input to be channel 1, so now they're linked. And if you want to keep them separated or linked as far as levels go, you can keep those levels linked so they're the same exact level. Or if you want to create channel 2 to be a safety for channel 1, you can actually keep them separated and keep channel 2 a little hair less, at least the level, keep it a little hair less, so if there's any blowouts, you don't get a clip in your audio, and if you do get it on channel 1, you always have that backup on channel 2. The other thing is too, you do have channel 3 and channel 4. If you have that XLR pack built onto there, you get those XLR audio inputs. You do have trimming, and you also have a lot of things that can go haywire in a menu setting. So one thing I always tell people is, if the camera's ever just doing anything weird, anything crazy, find this reset. There's some clients I customize a button for reset, because once in a while they'll get locked in an audio menu or an audio channel will set up, or they get the color that just goes way off on them. Set this reset. It'll reset the camera, and you can reset just the camera settings or just the assignable buttons if you want, so you have that option too. And when you go into the extended ND range, this is something to throw out there. All of our cinema cameras have ND filters built into them, whether it's a C100, C100 Mark II, all the way up to the C700, 500, 300, 3 and 2. You do have up to 10 stops on the later versions of these cameras. To get that 8 and 10 stops of ND filter, you go into the extended range and you turn this on. And that's how you get those extra stops of ND filters built into it. You also have the world where you can change it from speed to angle as far as your shutter mode goes, depending on what world you came from. If you came from a little more broadcast or film world, or if you're moving up from a DSLR. One of the other things that I think it's overlooked quite a bit is the shockless white balance. So I work with some clients who capture reality shows, and they go in buildings, they go out of buildings, and a lot of times they have some issues with the white balance coming in and out. So this shockless white balance is, if you have the camera set up in auto white balance, it's one less thing you have to worry about as far as exposure, sound, composition, everything. That shockless white balance will give you about a half a second to a full second before it changes that white balance. So it doesn't go in and you get, the amber looking bodies or the blue looking bodies. That shockless white balance is a pretty cool thing to have, but I don't think a lot of people actually know about. Custom profiles, custom picture looks. This is one thing that I think it's overlooked a little bit too. So you do have the option to come in and you can change. Oh no, did I just change this whole camera? While we experience a little technical difficulty, I'm going to work this out. So you do have the option to change a look profile, build it in the camera, so you can change your setup level, you can change your pedestal, so you can really get those deep, crisp blacks, and you can change the knee level, so you can actually let the highlight roll off so it doesn't clip nearly as fast, and you can set your slope point too. So you can really build a custom look inside this camera, save it to an SD card, and share it between the cameras, whether it's a 300 or a 500 or 3 300s or 2 500s. You can actually share that look back and forth. So if you are on a multi-camera shoot, you build a look, you put that camera together, you can basically take that look, put it on a card, and if you know you're going back to a location later, you can save that look on a card, or you can save up to 20 different looks per camera body, or excuse me, about 14 different looks per camera body. And you can just save those there. So if you're coming back to a location to do a pickup a week later or 2 weeks later, you have that look built right into that camera, and you can basically go right back to that look. And as far as camera settings, you can save all of those settings as well. So if you have the way you love your camera built up, like right now I've got this camera set up and it's all these buttons are perfect exactly the way I like it, I can save that setup onto a memory card, take it out, and put it into another camera. So if you're renting this camera, if you own this camera, you're loaning out to somebody, you have somebody use it. It's just like, I don't know, a seat in a car. If somebody adjusts your driver's side seat, you can actually just put in the little memory card and get everything back to the way you like it. So we've got, about 9 more minutes left, right?
Yes, that's about right. So we have a select few folks who still are camera shy with their questions. So do you have other tips that you wanted to share today?
Do I? Of course I do.
What was I thinking? Of course you do.
Of course. What are you talking about here? So one thing I would say is if you ever get a chance to actually get to work with one of these lenses, this is the 17 to 120, like I said. This lens, as far as the weight, as far as the balance goes, if you're over the shoulder, even the EF mount's nice and sturdy. We do make it in a PL mount as well. So this mount cinches up quite nicely. There is, and this is something that I think a lot of people overlook too, since we're talking about stuff to be overlooked. There's the manual and there's the servo control right on the bottom. So if you ever get to that point where, you're trying to set the zoom manually off of this, whether it's a 17 to 120, a 25 to 250, a 50 to 1000, all you have to do is just look on the bottom, boom, and now you let go of that. So the other pretty saucy thing about this is this grip, this control, this servo unit actually has an LCD screen built on the front, and there's a whole menu system set up for the LCD screen. So if you ever get this lens and you have, for some reason, it's not finding focus, it's not doing anything, you can go in and you can reset that lens. It will basically zoom everything back and forth. It will pull focus back and forth, and it will reset that lens to the factory setting. The other thing I think some people don't really notice when they see this camera or this lens is there's a macro setting on here too. So you can actually slide that over and you get a macro setting. So right off the bat, I think on the wide angle it's just under 3 feet. It's like 2.8 feet. You can actually set that macro slide over and it will get you even closer to your image or closer to your subject, so to speak. The other thing about this lens too is you have, like I said before, the full zoom and focus demand control built into this lens. So you have all of these, you have 3 different inputs right on the bottom there. There you go. You can see it right there. So with all of that control, you can basically set this camera on a tripod in the studio on, see whatever. Pull this camera off, throw it over your shoulder, and you can start running and gunning with that camera and that lens. You do get the autofocus that goes through. You do need to power up that lens. The communication between the camera and the lens goes through the EF mount. But as far as power goes, you do need to have a little extra power coming in. And a lot of times it's just basically like an IDX box slipped into the back and a D-tap right off the side. So most batteries have a D-tap on the side. Be very, very careful. Make sure the polarity is correct. We do, anytime this lens goes out, I would recommend just checking and making sure that you have the correct polarity, the correct voltage, that you don't brick the lens. I've never seen it happen, but I always hear little horror stories once in a while, but it's kind of good practice for any time you go to power up any other accessories too. But very solid lens. The 25 to 250, again, I want to talk about it as much as I can because I'm a big fan of that lens. Almost the same size, almost the same weight as this lens, and I left that picture-in-picture on in the corner while it was like a mini-me up in the corner there for a minute, wasn't it? All right. So the 25 to 250, basically the same size, a little bit same weight, more or less, but it does have that drop-in filter to where you can cover that full frame image sensor. So once you start rolling into some of the different lenses, some of the different applications for these lenses and these cameras, you start to see how they cover all the bases. So again, whatever your workflow is, whatever your delivery is, what have you, our cameras, our lenses work together, they interchange, they play nicely with each other. And they work well with, third-party cameras and lenses as well. Is there anything else that I didn't ramble on about that anybody's dying to know about?
No, we're good. We're good on the question front. Okay. That was pretty informational. We were talking about those lenses here with the mics up, of course, so you couldn't hear us. But
$25,000.
And then he followed that up with, well, there's a reason why it's that much. And then you were talking about some of those features, so it kind of worked out.
Lens does everything.
Yeah, I know. No, I think we're good there. We have just a couple minutes left, so I'll take that opportunity to thank you. It's always a joy to have you on here and doing presentations, and hopefully one of these days we will get to do that again in person.
I think the last time I saw y'all was the C500.
Yes. Like
a year ago almost?
Probably. Yeah, it's been a hot minute. Yeah, for sure. So for those of you who are tuning in, Peter's going to be back on Friday. We're going to have a different discussion. We're going to talk about the latest gear from Canon Cinema EOS. So definitely join us.
We couldn't cover it today.
Yes.
Yeah.
But it'll be different. It'll be, and you guys better have some questions. I'm just going to put that out there now. With that said, I want to thank you, Peter, and Stephanie, who's been hanging out behind the scenes on the Zoom session, for being here and making this happen. This is Cinema Week for Glazers, so we have a focus on promotions and highlighting special offers that are happening this week, as well bringing you some cinema-related education. We're now at week 3 of our anniversary event, so we're just at the beginning of week 3. So we have about 3.5 to 4 weeks more of content coming at you. Head over to glazerscamera.com/anniversary to check out the full schedule. The thing is, you definitely want to register for sessions. The reason for that is that there are a lot of promotions happening that are only available if you come into the store or if you register. Because they're so super secret, we can't tell you. You can only register to get them. So do that. Get your name on that mailing list. Register for sessions that you're interested in, because many of them have promotions tied. But that's all I can say, because I'll get into trouble if I say more than that. So go register. Peter, Stephanie, thank you so much. We will see you guys again on Friday at noon, and we'll be back tomorrow at noon Pacific time with Rode, and we're going to talk about audio with a focus on lavaliers, how to use them, where to place them, and all that good stuff. So thanks again, everybody, for tuning in, and we will see you tomorrow.